I love esports. I may not be the biggest fan or keep up with them the most religiously, but ever since I found out about the concept, I've been fascinated. I always wanted to be good enough to play at that level. I watched the tournaments and the streams. It was just so engaging. Seeing simple games played to a skill level that makes them anything but simple. The way a digital game allows for the rules and the balances of a sport to be so relative and complex, the pace and ebb and flow of an Overwatch game as teams push and pull to make space, the slow methodical crawl leading to explosions of violence in Valorant or CSGO, the insanity that is whatever Rainbow Six Siege pro games are.
All around this attic position at the moment, both players spotted, but the res can be made successfully.
Even the non-shooter pro scenes like Rocket League, Smash Bros, and even, God forbid, League of Legends. There's something beautiful and genuinely special to me about esports, and I've always loved playing sports and video games, but I've never actually been the biggest fan of watching sports. I went to a football game one time and spent most of the time reading a book. It just wasn't that engaging to me, despite the fact that I really do enjoy playing football. But esports, I could watch for almost any game, live or on stream. Embarrassingly enough, Overwatch was the game that fully got me into the concept and the scene. I had liked esports before, but never really stuck with any particular game. But then I got Overwatch for the PS4 in late 2017, and I was hooked on the game. It was so team-based, and not in a way like any other game I had played at that point. The concept of a shooter game being based around objectives with respawns was kind of new to me. The goal was no longer just kill the enemy team or even plant a bomb. That was only part of it, and I was obsessed with this game. I played competitively non-stop and was always frustrated that I was never really that good, especially being a console player. Overwatch is a unique game for this discussion because it was born and bred as an esports game. Its Pro League appeared practically alongside the release of the game, and in my opinion is one of the best run Pro Leagues that America has ever had in terms of fan engagement and setup. I saw it advertised inside the game and decided to check it out, and bam, I was hit with a game I loved so much being played at an actual amazing level, with teams and players that people knew and branding. They even had city-based teams so I could get invested in the places I knew or that were near me. When I started watching, there was no Atlanta team, so Florida and Houston became my favorite teams. Florida because I'm from there, and Houston because they had cool colors and actually won games, and I liked their players. Poor Florida Mayhem, they never did well, like, pretty much in the entire history of the league, but I was hooked. I bought jerseys, I downloaded the app, and I tried really hard to find a time to go see one of the games live because they had amazing in-person tournaments where the teams would tour around the US and play in these amazing arenas, and the energy was just fantastic, even just watching the streams of them. Unfortunately though, this is not a perfect little story, as things started to go south for the Overwatch League as the 2020s came their way. COVID shut down their ability to tour and play in person, leading to a complete change of how the league operated, and in 2021, the Activision Blizzard lawsuit hit for some of the grossest and most widespread sexual misconduct and gender discrimination that has at least ever been publicly acted upon in the video game scene.
He alleges that female employees, they are subjected to sex discrimination, unlawful sexual harassment, retaliation, and unequal pay. According to the complaint, female employees make up around 20% of the company's workforce. They're subjected to what is described as pervasive frat boy culture.
Though this is a constant and real problem from even some of the Pro League players I watched without knowing it at the time. To say the magic was gone would be an understatement. The Overwatch League would stay a thing, it still is, but I never really kept up with it after this, and in 2023, Overwatch 2 would come out and replace Overwatch for the pro scene and just normally. I tried to get back into the league when that happened, and even tried to get back into Overwatch 2, but I didn't really like the changes they made to the gameplay, and I just never connected with it as much. I didn't find the games as engaging to watch, so I mostly moved on, putting my time into Valorant. Now that I had a good PC to play games on, getting into that game competitively and watching their pro games when I could. Which brings us to December 6th, 2024. I had heard a lot of buzz around the release of the newest team-based shooter, Marvel Rivals, but I hadn't really paid that close of attention. I didn't watch the updates or the betas or the alphas, but when it dropped in December of last year, I started to see some of the pro Overwatch players that I actually still kept up with talking about it and liking it and posting gameplay and hinting at playing it professionally. And I'll tell you, when I saw the gameplay, I was shocked. It's just Overwatch, but in third person. Here, let me... It's just this. It's just Overwatch, but in third person. Now, technically that's an oversimplification, but I knew I had to download the game, and it turned out to be very interesting. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, Marvel Rivals. I want to dissect this game in my own way, looking at the decisions the developers have made for it as a casual game for players, a competitive game, and a professional game, and even briefly touching on the look of it through women in video games and esports, since it's been such a huge problem, and I was supposed to get this out during Women's History Month. I don't know if I'll still be able to do that. So you may be asking yourself, what is Marvel Rivals? If you're completely unfamiliar, it's a shooter game using Marvel characters to have a 6v6 objective-based match. By objective-based, I mean that the goal of the game is not inherently to kill the opponents, but instead to complete a secondary objective while killing your opponents. The secondary objectives in standard play are all very similar, but there are 3 different objectives based on what map you get. There are convergence maps, where the attacking team has to take control of a specific area by standing on it, while there are no other enemy players until it hits a charge of 100%, and then they have to push a little cart that spawns in from this location to the end of the map. There's a timer, and each checkpoint along the way adds a little bit more time before the attackers lose, with the defender's goal simply being stall them out until time runs out. Very similar in goal, there are also convoy maps, which work in the same way, except the attacking team just starts with the cart. There's no place they have to capture first. They just have to get the cart to the end of the map. And the last type, which is the most drastically different in terms of overall play, is domination maps, where both teams fight at the same time to hold one location until it charges to 100%, and then it has to be best 2 out of 3. A team has to stand on the objective area with no enemy players for long enough to claim the point, and then the percentage slowly counts up until they win, or the enemy team retakes it by standing on it while there are none of the other team until they capture it. You understand. In quick play, convoy and convergence are played one way, with one team on attack and one team on defense. If one team wins, that's the whole game. But in competitive modes, both teams get a chance to play attack and defense to see who can outperform the other, allowing there to be multiple rounds if both teams on attack complete the map. There are also arcade modes with various different rules that are usually limited time, like the soccer one a bit ago that was just like Rocket League. The teams themselves consist of 3 different types of characters and any amount that you want in your team. This is pretty typical for this kind of game. You have your tanks, or as they're called in this game, vanguards, the characters who are often the biggest and have the highest health. Their goal is usually to create space for their team to move up and to block incoming damage with shields or their own health, as well as to just get kills. There are DPS or duelists in this game who have less health but whose main focus is just on dealing damage and getting kills. And there are healers or strategists who can use their abilities to heal their teammates as well as get kills. Each character has a unique set of weapons and abilities, from guns to claws and everything in between, with characters who can fly, or even characters who don't have any guns, or even a character who can swim through the floor. Hello, Jeff. Each character also has an extremely strong ability called an ultimate, which charges up over time boosted by their performance in the game, and can drastically change how a fight goes. A lot of the goal of the game is timing your ultimates and abilities at the right time against the enemy team so you come out on top in a fight. Also unique for this game compared to some of its contemporaries is the team-up abilities. These are special powers and abilities granted to teams when they play with certain characters together. The Marvel characters make this very easy to integrate, as you can do classic duos and group-ups like they did recently when they added the Fantastic Four. If you play with any number of the Fantastic Four characters together on your team, they boost each other's abilities. Or if you play as Spider-Man or Penny Parker with Venom on your team, they get a symbiote ability. These abilities make building your team to the map or to your playstyle really important, as well as choosing characters that play well against your opponent's characters. So with the gameplay itself in mind, how is this game for the casual player? Well, it's complicated. The game itself works really well, and the mechanics are super satisfying to use and relatively easy to pick up, even if you're not familiar with the genre. While it has a bunch of team-ups and smart compositions, the base game works with most team combinations as long as you have all three types of characters on your team to some capacity. There's a huge player base currently, so finding a game only takes a couple of seconds, and games only last around 5 to 20 minutes, which makes it really playable and replayable. I would say there are a couple of things working against the game for casual players at the moment: the roster, the roles, and the matchmaking. The roster in general, from the moment the game released, was kind of a joke. During the closed alpha and beta testing of the game, the roster was at a pretty reasonable, but still high, 18 to 23 characters. This is a lot, but only a little bit above the normal type of games like these. Like Overwatch came out with 15 characters originally and have continued to come out with more. There's also something like Team Fortress 2 only having 9, but they have a little bit more of a streamlined gameplay anyway. But by the time the game had actually released to the public, this had only gotten more out of hand, bringing the character count up to 33. 33 characters. That's a lot, and I think this genuinely hurts the game a lot for casual players opening up the game for the first time, because while it gives more characters from the Marvel catalog that people may be fans of, which is certainly the marketing appeal of doing this, it makes a lot of decision anxiety when picking your character, and gives you so many characters to play, that there's a good chance that if you just play casually, there are still characters you probably have never played. And just as players were getting slightly comfortable with the characters that they dropped all of the Fantastic Four, bringing the character count up to 37. The Marvel Rivals director said in an interview about the release plan, "We'll actually be breaking down each season into 2 halves. The length of one season is 3 months, and for each half of the season, we will introduce a new hero." So their plan currently is for every month and a half a new character to be added to this already bloated roster. This is good for no one except for the marketing of the game, as they will consistently be able to add more popular characters to the game, hoping to bring in new players and bring back players who maybe had stopped because now their favorite caped hero finally got added. Even in my own experience, with a lot of time put into this game, I had to sit down for probably a couple hours and go to the practice range and just try all the different characters to even just try and get a sense of what they all do and what they're like to play, so I could play against them or as them effectively, and I can't imagine new casual players wanting to learn a textbook amount of character information to feel like they know what's happening when Invisible Woman throws them off the edge of the map for the third time. Ultimately, this isn't the worst thing for casual players out there. It does give a lot of fun characters to choose from, so it always feels like there's something new to play. And it's always fun to be able to play as your favorite characters, but it does speak a little bit to the priorities of the direction of the game, even if slightly. They are pushing out characters so fast without this really being that beneficial to the actual mechanics of the game, because adding this many characters means that you will never be able to truly focus on making the mechanics you already have work as best as possible. They can't tweak every character while they're also adding 45 new characters. What it does actually affect very negatively for casual players is my next issue, the roles in the game. The thing is, this is a problem with all games of these style. Everyone wants to play DPS. If you do well as DPS, they have the most fun, they get the most kills, they have all the flashy abilities, and oftentimes they're also the most popular characters. In this game, grabbing Spider-Man, Iron Man, Black Panther, Wolverine, and so many more fan favorites. The problem is, games designed like this need various roles to be filled for the fights to really work. Games can't be won with DPS alone, and that means for casual players who just want to play as the cool goth girl with a big sword, is that games are just a big fight over who gets to actually be on DPS for the team. Every single game is like this, and with a roster of 37 where 20, yes 20 of them are DPS, of course everyone wants to play some of them. They're most of the characters, and this usually leads to two things in casual games. Terrible teams that never had a chance because you're playing with 5 DPS and 1 healer, or the people who will actually bend to playing healers or tanks, or even just the people who enjoy these roles more are consistently feeling constrained and like they can't play anything else and actually win. And if you're playing with DPS who aren't very good, but understandably only want to play DPS because those are all the cool characters and they're just there to have fun, it can get really frustrating or even discouraging, because with the way the balance of the game works, if you have bad DPS and your enemy team has decent DPS, you will lose, even if you have good tanks and healers. The most common thing I've seen complained about in the chat in quick play and competitive is that it's a constant fight of hoping you get good DPS or fighting to lock in the DPS while letting other people take other roles. The solution a lot of games take to try and compensate for this problem is to try and lock roles, forcing players to queue up in the game as a tank or a healer or DPS, so there's no fighting and conflict over the players. But first, this is often only used in competitive mode since, again, for quick play, theoretically it's just people trying to have a good quick time. But this is also not a very good decision for this design of the game. One of the most impressive things I've seen about Marvel Rivals so far is the way that teams are very malleable. You can play triple healer, triple tank, triple DPS, or anything in between, and depending on your map and your skill level and your team ups, it can really work. Games where you have 3 tanks and 3 healers can be insane. Triple healer means you're almost impossible to kill in most scenarios, but if you don't have DPS that are good enough to match, you still might lose out even with all that healing. It's just so back and forth. This flexibility with the team-ups and design of the mechanics is one of the key design pieces that makes this game so impressive and fun, and you don't want to limit that by forcing people to play specific roles. So what is the solution here? Well, it's hard to say for casual players. The biggest hope is that you're just getting a good team with players who like playing a diverse selection of roles. Obviously, they're not going to cut down on the roster any amount, but hopefully, with their plans to add more, they'll focus more on tanks and healers for future characters and releases, and maybe slow down on the character releases in general. The last thing I'll say is difficult for casual players is the matchmaking itself. It's very oversaturated. As of February, there are over 40 million players, making it a strong up-and-coming multiplayer, getting close to some of the giants in terms of active player count. But I'm not sure the matchmaking algorithm is really the best for casual players. I haven't played too many quick play matches, I will say, but it does seem, especially on days with higher amounts of active players like Saturday and Sunday, that it isn't the most balanced, where you can bounce from games where you spawn hold the other team to ones where you get spawn held. I've heard several other players complaining about this, and it just kind of sucks to play a game that feels like it's not based on you, it's just based on your team that you get. Because at that point it feels like the game itself is completely out of balance with the characters, and it can be really rough. I don't know how their algorithm works, but it seems to be based on player level in quick play, and previous match results to pair teams together, because one of the most common things you'll see people talking about, and even something I've experienced, is that wins and losses seem to come in streaks, and it can make the game feel kind of predetermined. It makes me sometimes play until I get 2 losses in a row and just stop, because at that point I assume I'll be put onto a match with other players on a losing streak. I obviously can't confirm that this is how this works, so I can't critique it too heavily, but I think the game would certainly benefit from some tweaking to its matchmaking algorithm, because at times it can feel pretty ridiculous, especially in a casual setting. Overall, with these critiques in mind, I still think this game is pretty great for casual players. You have so many characters to play as, and the skill level to get into them is much lower than a lot of games like Valorant, Counter-Strike, or even COD. You have a huge hitbox on most characters, and a lot of characters either have very wide attacks, like the melee characters, or just literally have auto-lock aiming like a bunch of the healers do. Your healing literally just locks onto the teammates. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is great, actually. If you make your game this daunting to pick up, it's honestly impressive to see most characters feel pretty playable while also feeling like there's so much you could get better at and master in each character. The thing that worries me more about the longevity of the casual player base is the priorities of the developers. With the oversaturation of characters and the strange matchmaking, it just feels a little sloppy and all over the place in a way that can really kind of push new players back after a couple of games, compared to something that feels simpler and more balanced like COD or Fortnite, which doesn't bode inherently well for how the game works on a competitive level. But mainly, I just hope the developers focus on refining what's already there instead of continuing to add more. Now we get to my favorite part of the game from a player standpoint, which is competitive play. Since I was but a wee lad, I've always loved competitive video games. I couldn't handle them very well when things didn't go my way, but I had other issues I was working out. Even in random stuff, I just wanted to be the best. I think for video games especially, like most sports, when you're playing the game at a truly high level, you're playing the game at its most fun if it's well designed. Which is why I was top 10 ranked for the whole Minecraft server on a Minecraft ripoff game of CSGO growing up. True story, I don't know why I played it so much. I was part of a clan and everything. I probably logged hundreds of hours in a Minecraft CSGO ripoff. They recreated all the maps and everything. I was one of the best players in the game. Why did I do that? Anyway, I love playing ranked games, even if I'm usually not the greatest. But it varies a lot in experience depending on how the game is designed and what the developers prioritize in the way the competitive games are run. There are a couple of key points that in my opinion will make or break the experience, some of which we've already touched on, like the roster and overall game design of the team dynamics, but we also want to look at the rank-up mechanics and statistics and matchmaking, as well as just how they run the seasons and the overall experience of the game. And I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised at how well this game is designed for all of these things on the whole. Let's break it down. From a character standpoint, we run into a little bit of the same problem with the oversaturation of the roster, but it's not quite as bad when you're playing at a higher skill level, and clear metas start to show themselves on what is the best to play, with nerfs and buffs being added in between seasons to change up what characters are the characters you need to play as. There's a good sense that in most cases, there are a lot of viable options for what characters you can actually run on a team. Like I said, the ability to run triple of just about any role. Unfortunately, you still run into the problem of fighting over DPS roles within a team, and annoyance, especially if people will only play one role in DPS that will not counter well to what the enemies are playing. But again, that's less of a game flaw as much as it is a normal thing to run into any of these kinds of games. But on the whole, the diversity of play makes the roster pretty appealing, especially when you get to Diamond and higher ranks where they introduce the mechanics of bans. This is like an ace in a hole to make the game a lot more interesting and well balanced in the roster, because each team gets to select 2 characters that they ban for the match. This lets you ban important characters in a lot of different ways. The top banned characters are often the a little bit overpowered characters for the season, usually DPS, like Winter Soldier, Hela, Wolverine, or even Spider-Man, because he can be such a nuisance to the back line. But other key bans can be on healers like Luna Snow, Cloak and Dagger, and Invisible Woman, whose ultimates are perfect counters to pretty much any DPS or tank ult. This makes the dynamic of what you want to play and what your team decides to ban a lot more complex. This is something I've seen a lot of competitive video games do, but often only for professional games. Games like Overwatch adopted this mechanic in their pro leagues after it got super stagnant and every pro team was just playing the same thing over and over. So while I still think the frequency in which they want to add characters is not an overall good thing for the mechanics and the priority of the game, from a competitive point of view, the big rosters and things like bans make the gameplay a lot more diverse and not as stagnant as it could be in a hero shooter type game. And the overall gameplay is definitely a lot more evenly balanced and fun and competitive. I honestly just don't enjoy Convoy and Convergence maps in quick play because you don't get a chance to play attack and defense. It feels like the game was designed for their competitive mode because it rounds out stuff that was really an issue in the quick play. The ranking up system is one that I was also surprised with. Again, I'm not within the code of the game, so I don't know exactly how it works on a technical level, but I can speak from my own experience and from what I've read other players say. The rank up system, compared to a lot of other games I've played, is honestly refreshing. For comparison, I'll bring up Valorant's ranking system, since that's what I'm coming over from directly as a player. Valorant uses a pretty standard system design of RR, or rank rating, which are points you gain or lose depending on if you win or lose matches, and a couple other factors, and MMR, which is not visible, which is matchmaking rating, which keeps track of all the players in the whole game in a ladder-style list. Your RR gained from the game is affected by your MMR, which can help out if you're like the best MMR ranked player on a losing team, or if a new season has just started and you're trying to get back to the rank you were in a previous season, your MMR being higher will tell the game that you're probably a better player and will give you more points for your victories. This system is a lot more complex than I'm explaining here. Stuff like individual match performances will affect earned RR, and higher MMR can rank you up double if your RR is a lot different from your MMR. Marvel Rivals is a game that hasn't been out for nearly as long, and I haven't seen the developers openly talk about their system like Valorant has, but presumably they are using, from how it seems, an RR and MMR system like most ranked games of this style do. But my experience with this rank system personally has felt a lot more balanced as a relatively new game. In Marvel Rivals there are 9 ranks in total. Each up to the second highest, Eternity, has 3 sub-rankings, starting at 3 and going to 1. So the lowest ranked tier is Bronze 3, then Bronze 2, Bronze 1, Silver 3, Silver 2, and so on. Each rank has 100 points until the next rank. To the best of my ability and my ability to scour Reddit, as user similar code 368 said, it seems like you can get anywhere between 20 to 60 points for a win, and lose about 20 to 40 points for a loss. In my experience, this system is very forgiving, or at least it seemed to work pretty well to get me to a skill level on the ranking chart that I feel like I'm actually at. Early on in games where I was in bronze through gold, I would consistently get far more points for wins than I would get for losses, making it so that games where I outperformed my team, or even games where I just played badly, were never too punishing for my overall skill level. Once I learned the game a bit more and felt out the meta for the season, I was able to climb up the ranks in a pretty satisfying and forgiving way. This could all just be coincidence, and I could just be better at Marvel Rivals than something more precision-based like Valorant. But one of my biggest frustrations with Valorant, and even Overwatch, is it constantly felt like I was fighting a losing battle and would consistently be losing more points for losses than gaining points for wins. That just made the whole experience a lot less fun, and ultimately it probably does mean, according to my MMR/RR system, that I was just not as good as those games, but it made me way less likely to want to hop on and get better competitively, because the consequences for any given loss meant a ton to my overall standing. Rivals seems to, early on until you find your skill level, prioritize the opposite. They even have rank shields that charge up with losses to protect you from losing points every once in a while, so you're not spiraling down in a constant down rank. This eventually goes away when you get high enough, but this simple addition that doesn't really affect your overall standing but helps change the psychology of loss after loss makes the game a lot more approachable from a competitive perspective. This big win-lose disparage points-wise and the shield went away right around when I found the place I was comfortable at skill ranking-wise, a place where I felt like I still had room to grow, but that the teams were about equal with me, which is when the game gets most fun because you're playing a balanced game. You don't have a bunch of terrible people who might just randomly end up on your team. For this season, I've rounded out anywhere from Diamond 1 to Diamond 3, and pretty much stayed there since I've got there. Haven't made it any higher, usually haven't fallen any lower without immediately going right back up, which I think is a sign that it's about where I'm at skill-wise, and hopefully I'm able to grow more and get out of there, but for now I would say this genuinely works, and I'm really happy I was able to get to Diamond and be able to play on a level that feels balanced. Now I will say this is not just a perfect system. I've had a really good experience with this, but in my time looking around, a lot of people have not. And you still run into some of the issues of quick play matchmaking. Really the biggest complaint I still see thrown about is that sometimes you'll get just someone who is awful on your team, and sometimes it still feels like the game will pair you off in win or loss streaks. One player even suggested to go play a quick play match if you lose even one competitive game, because at that point the game will stop pairing you with losing players. And whether there's any validity to that, I don't know, but I can say it does feel like that sometimes for whatever algorithmic reason. A lot of people have also noted that DPS players often seem to have a much more forgiving time with rank up points, because their stats are naturally flashier than healers and tanks, whose value isn't inherently found in trackable numbers as much as it is timing and making space. With many people complaining that as high as Platinum you'll find DPS players who seemingly don't have a great understanding of the game at all, who only play 2 DPS characters, who can really tank the team, especially if they get outperformed and refuse to switch to any other roles. Again, even in my relatively smooth rank up, I ran into a lot of this. Especially Spider-Man players. If I see a Spider-Man player on my team, even in Diamond, I get like PTSD. I can't stand Spider-Man players. So it's far from a perfect rank up system, but I'm honestly overall pretty impressed with it. Mainly because it's one of the first games that's made getting to a rank where I feel comfortable and equally matched not feel like pulling teeth. It still took putting in a lot of hours, but when you feel like you're actually getting something done, and every loss doesn't send you back to the very beginning, grinding out ranks was pretty enjoyable for the most part. The last thing I'll briefly comment on before moving on to our next chapter is the priority of the devs. As I've already established, it certainly doesn't seem like they have the greatest priorities when it comes to making a game that's good for the players versus making a game that gets you the most money. Now, in some ways, like skins, they've been surprisingly generous comparatively to other companies. Riot Games. But in many of the decisions previously mentioned, I just don't see them going forward as a company that prioritizes the game. A competitive, relevant example of this is when they announced that they were going to do rank resets every half season. If you remember, this would be every month and a half. Luckily, they pretty much got cyberbullied out of making this decision, but you don't come to that decision because you think resetting the ranks every month and a half will make for a more balanced or fun experience for the players. The only possible motivation I can think of is to keep players playing as much as possible. If you want them to put in the hours of grinding up ranks to fit in, well, good luck doing that every other month. Maybe you could make an argument that this was only because they also wanted to do a character release every half season, but even releasing that many characters, as I've gone over, isn't that good of a decision for the overall game either. And it's mostly just going to help with player retention and new player marketing. Again, they didn't end up doing it and instead are doing rank resets at the end of the season, like a normal game, but the fact that this was something they would even consider, especially after the insane backlash League of Legends just got for trying to do something similar, doesn't give me much hope for what decisions the devs will make into the future for the health and longevity of the game and the competitive experience. The last section will be the shortest and one of the most fun to go over, but this will just be a brief conversation about how the professional scene has been going so far. There hasn't been much professional play since the game hasn't been around for too long. I just had a lot of fun watching the North American Invitational Tournament, and really that's about as much as the game has been doing so far in terms of the pro scene. There have been a couple of officially streamed tournaments by the Marvel Rivals channel, including 2 Invitational North American tournaments, the Marvel Rivals Championship, and, as of right now while I'm writing this, the Invitational EMEA tournament. So far, it's been pretty basic in terms of how it's been run. Teams can be started by anyone, you just have to go to the Tournaments tab of the game and get started walking through with players, regions, and skill level. You can have a maximum of 12 players on your team, and you get to select the name and the logo and all that kind of fun stuff. As you can imagine by the name, the official tournaments that have been run so far are invitational, so they're pretty much only selected from the top players within a certain pool. A lot of the top teams now in North America are filled with career pro players. Funnily enough, a decent amount of players I know from the Overwatch League. As for the games themselves, it's clear, like with Overwatch, that this is a game obviously designed to be played at a professional level. I would say the games are actually even a little smoother than Overwatch because of average match time. Even among the pros, it's a lot shorter. The main thing I wanted to talk about in this section, though, beyond just saying I like watching the pros play the game, is what the priorities are so far and where I'd like to see them grow. At the moment, the game is still figuring out a lot in terms of how it runs and how it will change and grow, and as I've addressed throughout this video, those are super important for how well this game will hold up over time. Essentially, it's only 3.5 months old, and a lot of games come and go pretty fast, even ones with as much popularity and potential as this game. However, the Marvel branding does help a lot, but that actually brings me to why I think it would be really great for them to keep trying to grow the Pro League as they get bigger. The Marvel branding just adds to what can already be a huge moneymaker for these kind of games when you hit the in-person tournament level, with team branding and things like that bringing in merch and a lot of fan support. Now, of course, I am biased here. I am saying this because I definitely want something like the Overwatch League used to be in the glory days, but I would also say that it's something Americans could use more of in terms of general esports, a game with enough pull to fill up stadiums and get people excited. Yes, there are definitely big video game tournaments in the US, but it's been a while since we've had a game like Marvel Rivals, which has such mass appeal to kind of bring people into the world of professional gaming as an event that you'd want to go see in person. And trust me, if you've never watched any in-person tournaments, the energy is just so much different. Now, official game-sponsored teams are not the only way to generate this kind of hype, though it can help in terms of branding, with the Overwatch League having stuff like official team skins in-game and a lot of merchandise. But I still personally think it would be a smart idea in terms of preserving and building energy and excitement around the pro scene if that's something the devs are interested in investing in. Capitalizing on that early hype and recognizable names to build something that will be more long-lasting. Plus, I just want to see live games. please. I just want to see a live game. I briefly interacted with pro player Aramori on one of her practice live streams, leaving a comment asking if she had heard anything in terms of planning around an official game-sponsored league similar to the Overwatch League. And she said that she had heard people kind of throwing that around by players and coaches, but that she had not heard anything official from any of the actual, development team that they would actually be making any plans to move towards that. But I can dream. Aramori does transition me into the last thing I'll mention here before we wrap up, which is the fact that we have Aramori on the Sentinels, one of the top pro teams right now who just placed 3rd in the Invitational Tournament. I've followed Aramori for a while back from her Overwatch days, via me liking Crimzo as a player. One of the things she really opened my eyes to that I think is really important to just talk about in general is the fact that the misogyny and hate women get in games extends to the pro scene. She's talked at length many different times, sharing a lot of stories from herself and different players of the horrible ways that they have been treated and the heavy expectations placed on them for just being a woman on the team. Famously, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Overwatch League and Overwatch in general had some pretty hideous stuff going on with its staff and its players. Kim Se-yoon, sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name, was the Overwatch League's first female pro player who from the very start of her career was put under suspicion for just being as good as she was. She used a very high sensitivity on her mouse, which is unusual, and got accused of cheating while on her first team, having to play while being monitored to prove that she wasn't. Then when she joined the Shanghai Dragons in Season 1 of the Overwatch League, their team never did particularly well. In fact, they didn't win pretty much anything, but the highlight of that from fans and even other players and commentators was the fact that they had a woman on their team, and she would constantly be singled out and criticized even though their whole team just wasn't that great. She would also consistently get criticized for her looks, as she definitely didn't fit the male gamer fantasy of what women are supposed to look like. Ultimately, she left the league and decided to focus more on streaming instead of pro games. And this stigma placed around female players in the Overwatch League extended to pretty much any other woman looking to get into the Overwatch League, like Aramori, who mentioned that it was almost impossible to get signed to a pro Overwatch team at the time because team members and sometimes coaches just wouldn't want a girl on their team, even if they were good enough to be there, and would come up with reasons for them to not want a woman on the team that they could actually use, like the fact that they were housed in apartments together during the season so that they could play together and practice together, and when they toured together to different tournaments, and players saying it would make them uncomfortable to have a woman on the team living around them. There are countless other examples of people being very weird and downright hateful towards women in the pro scene and just in video games in general.
That's a female?
I think so.
I got hella Dink Arena.
It's literally their worst player. Sorry.
Yeah, that's Kingdom.
Yeah, like their soldier, bro. They're letting
He's
the
all
girl.
5.
I just realized we're getting killed by a girl. I am genuinely sexist. Like,
I thought you were misogynist, it's not sexist.
it's the same shit. Whatever.
You're already cutting you up, Sam.
Even Aramori, who has recently posted some photos as she's gotten prouder of how she looks, that are just very simple, pretty tame, thirst trap style images, the kind of stuff you'd see most people post, and people will try and use that and say random stuff about that's the only reason she's on the team, and just using it to degrade her for being confident in how she looks. But the fact that at the start of the game, we have a player like Aramori in the pro scene who has so much experience in pro gaming as a player and a coach, and seeing her get shouted out so much on the official streams as just one of the smartest players out there at the moment, using her as a platform to promote women in video games and especially in esports, I just thought was a good start, and I genuinely hope that we get to see more women join the pro scene as we go forward, and just more people feeling okay to actually play and talk during the game without being afraid of what the team will think if you have a slightly feminine voice. And you may not realize this, but this is a serious problem that keeps women off of games like this. If it's a game that requires voice chat to play well, which team strategy games really do, you need communication. Women and even feminine-sounding men are scared to talk because they don't want the pressure placed on them of just being like, oh great, a woman is on our team, where everyone will say they lost just because of you, or they will start saying hateful or even grotesquely sexual things to you. I mean, I've even been called homophobic slurs multiple times for having a pride flag on Valorant. One person citing Daddy Trump being elected so they can finally say slurs again. It genuinely takes something that is supposed to be fun for everyone and makes it not a safe or comfortable environment. I mean, there are people who don't even want their daughters playing these kinds of games for fear of what they'll have to run into. It's a real problem, and not one that we should just accept as a fact of video games. And the only thing I know how to do to help about it is speak out about it and try and make it not the norm. It's one of the only things I think left that people will still just say, oh, well, that's like boys being boys, that's video games being video games, you'll run into the worst people in the world. That shouldn't have to be the case. Video games are not a man thing, or even a straight man thing. They are and should be a safe space for everyone to play and thrive in, and I'm hoping, just maybe, the Marvel Rivals pro scene can be a place where women feel a little more comfortable. Fingers crossed. As of writing this is Women's History Month, and that's part of the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place. Video games are a part of women's history, and I want that history to be a proud history, not a continued history of the mistreatment of women at every level of the video game industry.
But you know, me and you have talked in DMs, and as like the first female pro in Marvel Rivals, like what does this mean to you to compete under that Sentinels banner? Do you have a message to kind of people who look up to you?
Yeah, I've had quite a few girls DM me, and the biggest thing I want to say is just make sure you guys calm and talk in ranked. It's the most important thing you can do. If I didn't calm and talk in ranked, I wouldn't be on this team, right? Like, that's how I ran into my teammates. That's how they wanted to play with me, and I think it's a skill that every girl should practice. So keep it up. You guys got it. No matter who is out there giving you shit, don't listen to them.
So we've come to the end of the video, and I guess I have to wrap up all this rambling into some kind of point or conclusion. Well, as I hope I've highlighted throughout this video, I'm by no means an expert on any of this stuff, and Marvel Rivals itself is a very young game, but it's one that has really massive potential, and it's something that I've found that reminds me of a lot of the things that made me get into shooter games in the first place. The fun, fast-paced strategy of a team working together. All of the pieces in their place become more than just individual players. But the game, in its short lifespan, has already made, in my opinion, some very baffling decisions that I hope they will steer clear from, and it's tough to balance to try and keep different players happy and to continue to grow as a game, as well as making some genuinely really smart decisions that I'm really excited about. I'm rooting for them, and if anything, I hope this video showed you some of the aspects of games that you hadn't thought of before. If you've never watched esports, maybe check them out once you get to know how the game is actually supposed to work. It can be really amazing. Maybe this has shown you a little bit of why these games can be so fun in the first place, and you want to try them out for the first time. Whatever your takeaway from the video is, personally, I want the takeaway for myself to be that I love video games, and I love teamwork within video games, and I honestly love the video game industry for as messed up and terrible as it has been for so many years, and I want to see it get better, to make decisions that prioritize quality games and not rushing the developers, that focus on making long-lasting games, not just games that bring in the most money, and to create a space where women can feel comfortable continuing to design for and play video games on whatever level they want. And I hope, maybe a little foolishly, that Marvel Rivals could be a step in the right direction, if they just make smart choices going forward. Thanks for watching. Whew. This was a long one to write. This took me a long time to make. I hope you guys enjoy. It's a little bit different than what I normally do, but I love talking about video games, and I love getting to deep dive into something like this. Thank you guys for checking out my channel that of late. I know it's kind of a lull season for YouTube watch in general, but I appreciate the continued support. And yeah, please subscribe and like if you want to. Comment your favorite esports video game, and I might check it out because I genuinely really love esports. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I love you all, and good night.